Thank you very much. We have been called to participate, invited to participate in this conference to celebrate what happened 25 years ago. And I have been following most of the speeches being delivered here, and I want to congratulate everyone who has contributed in one way or another. But I could not, at the same time, put aside a feeling that was growing within me that was related to the fact that whilst we are supposed to be celebrating a wonderful event, there are millions of unemployed people out there. 25 years after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the symbolic meaning of that event, and at the same time, we have millions of unemployed looking at us. And I ask myself, and I have been asking myself throughout this conference, what would the unemployed out there tell us had they been listening to what we have been saying? And they would, of course, celebrate the wonderful events of 25 years ago, but they would ask us, but what are the solutions for us today? How can we use the events of 25 years ago to possibly come up with solutions to the challenges that we are facing today? In a sense, I think the ICD has tried to address this dilemma. Celebration looking back, but coming up with solutions looking forward. And interesting, I don't know whether this was I don't think it was a coincidence, I think it was done specifically. The ICD decided to organize 2 parallel meetings, one in this room and one in a room close to us. And in this room, we were supposed to, and we did, in fact, speak about the wall and the removal of barriers and the removal of the wall. But then there was a Berlin Economic Forum across the room there. And they were talking about sustainable economies. And they were talking about not celebration, but they were talking about the challenges. The challenge today, the challenge that we are all facing. Economies that are coming out of a terrible experience we have just lived through in the past 5 years. We celebrate 25 years ago, but we remind ourselves that we are still not out of the tremendous impact of these past 5 years, with the total economic collapse, with countries in Europe that used to be symbols of success, tiger economies, we used to call them, and that have now become countries that have had to make use of support from the IMF, from the European Union. So I wanted to address the topic that I've been asked to address, giving you a Maltese perspective, giving you, in a sense, our experience of an island state that went through these difficulties, and possibly suggest perhaps some ways forward, which are linked as well to what we have heard throughout this conference. This morning's session focused a lot on the importance of education as a key element that will allow economies to address the challenges. So, I think that in order to be able to bring this conference to a viable and concrete conclusion, we will not only celebrate the events of 25 years ago, but we must, at the closure, understand that we are facing some tremendous challenges, and that we must also think about what possible solutions we have for these challenges. We have responsibilities, all of us. I think we have a tremendous responsibility towards our generation and that of our children and grandchildren. We have a responsibility to provide sustainable economies. In other words, economies that are able to provide the jobs for the children, the jobs for the children that eventually will become our future citizens. So sustainability is the challenge. Primarily, it concerns not just the economy around us, but it concerns as well the environment. It is also about how to have an environment that generates economic activity. So it is about, for example, taking action in order to have an energy policy that produces energy, enough energy to fuel one's economy without poisoning the air we breathe. It is about having a waste treatment system that uses waste as a resource, but which also responds to the needs of the domestic and the industrial sectors we have in our countries. It is about quality of life. It is about standard of living. It is about the well-being of our citizens. Fortunately, today, I think there is a growing realization amongst peoples all over the world that these challenges are not someone else's nightmare, but they are ours as well. A realization that has encouraged governments, corporations, and civil society to work together to achieve a sustainable future for the global community. Just over, a week ago, I think it was, on the 2nd of November, the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, published their latest assessment of the state of the global climate. In his reactions to these latest conclusions and recommendations, His Excellency Mr. Ban Ki-moon said, and I quote, "With this latest report, science has spoken yet again, and this time with much more clarity. Time is not on our side. Leaders must act." This is what a few days ago, barely a week ago, we were presented with by the United Nations. Ban Ki-moon's appeal should not go unheeded. If we want to respond to the millions of unemployed, if we want to respond to the future of our children, if we want to give an answer to everyone that the lessons of the past have indeed pushed us to take concrete decisions, then we must take up this call and take up this challenge. No one is excused and no one is excluded because we are all in this together. Malta, which is a small island, like every other country, it is not immune from the effects of all of this. The rise in sea level will eat up parts of our already very limited territory, and it will ruin a large part of our beautiful beaches. But so will other disasters have an impact on us, even if they take place a long distance away from our shores. For example, we suffer the consequences of lack of water and the desertification in the sub-Saharan Africa. Why? Because most of the irregular migration, which ends up on our shores, on the shores of Italy, and which ends up impacting the rest of the European continent, with all the negative consequences and with all the populism that comes with it, and with the terrible language we listened to during the European Parliament elections of people who decided to take an anti-human and anti-dignity language, well, that is all part and parcel and impact, amongst other things, of the lack of water in sub-Saharan Africa, or of the political, social, economic turmoil taking place over there, or further up in the Arab world. All of that impacts on mass migration, which is the migration of broken human beings desperately trying to seek refuge elsewhere in Europe. So whilst we celebrate 25 years from the fall of the wall of the Berlin Wall, are we celebrating the fall of walls and barriers, but at the same time insisting that we put up barriers to let people die in the middle of the Mediterranean? Are we contradicting ourselves so much that at the same time we can celebrate the removal of walls, but then condone the murder of thousands of innocent people in the middle of the Mediterranean? And likewise, I speak about what happens in our region, but what happens in our region with respect to migration happens all over the world. It happens in the Caribbean, it happens in the North American continent, it happens in Asia, and yet the human race has not yet found a practical and realistic solution to this problem. In short, The point I was trying to make is that all of these events taking place thousands of miles away from our own country eventually have an impact on us directly. And it is indeed a global village. A global village where each one of us, every country, including my country, notwithstanding its relatively small size, all of us have a role to play in finding solutions. This forum invites us to identify effective policies that address these challenges, or some of them anyway. I do not propose to give you solutions at the end of this conference, but I want to just make one particular point, which is, in my opinion, very important. In the case of Malta, which is a small island of 400,000 people, cut off from the rest of the continent, surrounded by the sea, it is an island that has no natural resources at all, nothing. We joke internally that we have countries to our north who have oil, to our south who have oil, to our east and west who have oil and gas. But this island in the center has absolutely no sign at all of these blessed resources provided by God Almighty. So we have had to cope thanks to our own resources. The only resource we have are our own people. Mind you, they are the best oil well you could possibly imagine. You see, an oil well, you pump oil out of the well, and the well gets emptier and emptier. With human resources, it's the other way around. You pump into the human resource, and that human resource becomes wealthier and wealthier. Which means, and this is the point I want to make, and I will not continue with the rest of my speech because time is pressing, which means that education is the key. In other words, if we put education as the priority policy of governments, giving our younger generation the tools that are necessary for them to be able to occupy the jobs, the opportunities, to create, to innovate, to stimulate themselves the economy, to go for small and medium-sized enterprises that are always the end result and the fruit of the creativity and innovation of our younger generation. If we are able to do that, then perhaps we can start taking the results that will eventually create a sustainable economy. Now, this is easier said than done because achieving all of this very often requires some tough decisions. In my country, we had to take some tough decisions to be able to achieve what we needed to achieve. We needed to reform the public sector. We needed to take decisions to reduce employment, which was necessary. We needed to close down shipyards. We needed to tell people that weren't needed in that particular sector, but we needed to encourage them to go to a different career, profession. And therefore, once you put education as the key and priority of your policy, then it becomes clear that the next step is to encourage your younger generation to go for investment into their abilities for the sectors that the economy requires. So I will conclude my intervention, Mr. Chairperson, by urging everybody that has attended this conference to go back and to, of course, celebrate the meaning of what happened 25 years ago. But to remember that that happened because people coming together, generations that were divided artificially, came together because they believed in themselves as human beings to be able to do the best for themselves and for their own community. That lesson learned 25 years ago, I hope will inspire us to address the challenges that we are facing today and the challenges that are so important for us if we want to give a future to our children. Thank you very much.